A fortune worth billions vanished in seconds. A ruthless conspiracy closed in from all sides, but salvation would come from the most unexpected place, a small, hungry girl with a worn teddy bear who saw what no one else could see. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe for more incredible stories that will touch your heart. The phone screen shattered against the marble floor of the penthouse office. Richard Foster, 42 years old, stood frozen at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, his hands trembling as he stared at his laptop. The numbers were gone. All of them. $6.8 billion vanished from his investment accounts in less than 3 minutes. "Sir, the board is calling again," his assistant Margaret whispered from the doorway, her voice barely audible over the chaos erupting throughout Foster Industries headquarters. Richard didn't turn around. He couldn't. His reflection in the glass showed a man he barely recognized, pale, sweat-drenched, defeated. It had been exactly 1 week since his divorce from Victoria became final. 1 week since she'd walked out of the courthouse with that cold smile, promising he'd regret ever crossing her. He'd laughed it off then, surrounded by his lawyers and advisors. Victoria was a brilliant attorney, yes, but she couldn't touch his fortune. Everything was protected, locked behind layers of legal structures and offshore accounts. He'd been so wrong. "The transactions originated from the Cayman accounts," his CFO, Daniel, rushed in, tablet in hand, his face ashen. "But there's more, Richard. Someone's been accessing your private servers for months. They have everything. Emails, contracts, the merger plans with Stellar Tech. It's all over the financial networks. Our stock is in free fall." Richard's mind raced. Victoria had access to those accounts during their marriage. She'd helped him set them up, actually, back when he trusted her completely. But the passwords had been changed, the security upgraded after the separation. How could she possibly? His personal phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Enjoying the view from the top while you still can. By midnight you'll have nothing. Not your company, not your reputation, not your freedom. V." The room spun. Richard gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. This wasn't just about money. Victoria had orchestrated something far more devastating. She'd planted evidence, manipulated records, positioned him for a complete takedown. "Sir, there's something else," Margaret said, her voice cracking. "The SEC just announced an emergency investigation into Foster Industries. They're alleging insider trading, fraud, money laundering. Federal agents are downstairs. They have warrants." Richard's chest tightened, his vision blurred. This couldn't be happening. 20 years of building his empire, of clawing his way from a middle-class neighborhood in Boston to the pinnacle of American business, all of it collapsing in real time. "Get me Jonathan Werner on the phone," he commanded, referring to his most trusted legal advisor. "Now." "He's not answering, sir. None of your legal team is. They've all resigned this morning." The betrayal cut deeper than the financial loss. Victoria hadn't just stolen his money. She'd systematically dismantled his entire support structure, turned his allies against him, isolated him completely. And the worst part, he had no idea how deep her conspiracy went or who else was involved. "Sir, the agents are coming up," Margaret warned, backing toward the door. "They're asking for you specifically." Richard looked at his reflection one last time. 42 years old, self-made billionaire, industry titan. In less than an hour, he'd become a cautionary tale, another fallen mogul destroyed by his own arrogance, and a vindictive ex-wife who'd played the long game better than he ever could have imagined. But as the elevator doors opened down the hall, and heavy footsteps echoed toward his office, Richard Foster made a decision. He wouldn't go down without a fight. Somewhere in this nightmare, there had to be a thread he could pull, a mistake Victoria had made, a way to prove his innocence and reclaim everything she'd stolen. He just had to find it before midnight. The rain came down hard on the streets of Lower Manhattan, turning the sidewalks into rivers of grey water and garbage. 7-year-old Emma Miller pressed herself deeper into the doorway of an abandoned storefront on Canal Street, clutching her threadbare teddy bear against her chest. The bear's left eye was missing, and stuffing leaked from a tear in its side, but it was the only thing she had left from her mother. Her stomach cramped with hunger. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, when the soup kitchen on Bowery had given her half a sandwich. Her father, Tom Miller, 35 years old, was supposed to meet her here 3 hours ago. He'd promised this time would be different, that he'd found a job at a warehouse in Brooklyn, and they'd finally get a real place to stay. But Emma had learned not to believe promises anymore. She watched the expensive cars splash through puddles, their occupants warm and dry, and probably heading home to dinner. Sometimes she imagined what that must feel like, to have a home, a bed, food whenever you wanted it. Before Mum got sick 2 years ago, they'd had all those things. A small apartment in Queens, nothing fancy, but it was theirs. Then came the cancer, the medical bills, her father's desperate attempts to save her mother, taking loans from dangerous people, Mom's death 6 months ago, and the final collapse, eviction, her father's descent into depression and drinking, the shelters that turned them away, the streets that became their only refuge. "Hey, kid, you can't stay here," a security guard barked from across the street, pointing at her. "Move along." Emma gathered her few possessions, the teddy bear, a plastic bag with a change of clothes, a picture of her mother, and started walking. The rain soaked through her thin jacket within seconds. She'd learned the patterns of the city, where she could rest for a few hours without being chased away, which subway stations had the warmest corners, which restaurant back alleys had the best chance of finding discarded food. As she trudged down the wet sidewalk, something caught her attention. A black town car had pulled up abruptly to the curb ahead, and a man stumbled out, tall, wearing an expensive suit now rumpled and soaked, his face a mask of panic and desperation. Even from a distance, Emma could see he was crying. Richard Foster leaned against the car, gasping for air. The federal agents had taken his phone, his laptop, everything. But in the chaos of the office raid, he'd managed to slip away through the service elevator. His driver had been waiting, bless him, one of the few people who hadn't abandoned him yet. "Sir, where do you want to go?" the driver asked nervously. "Your penthouse is probably being watched, so is your Connecticut estate." Richard had nowhere to go. His assets were frozen, his credit cards weren't working, even his closest friends weren't returning calls. Victoria had been thorough, devastatingly so. "Just drive," he muttered, climbing back into the car. As they pulled away, his eyes met those of a small girl standing in the rain, soaked to the bone, holding a ragged teddy bear. For just a moment, their gazes locked, and Richard saw something in her expression, not pity, not judgment, but understanding. As if she knew exactly what it felt like to watch your entire world crumble. Then the car turned the corner and she was gone. Richard spent the next 2 hours in the back of the town car, driving aimlessly through the city while his driver, Marcus, remained mercifully silent. The radio news was brutal, every station leading with the story of his spectacular fall. Billionaire Richard Foster, once considered one of Wall Street's golden boys, is now the subject of a federal investigation that could result in decades of prison time. Sources close to the investigation suggest that evidence of massive fraud and insider trading is overwhelming. His ex-wife Victoria was everywhere, giving carefully crafted statements to the press. "I'm deeply saddened to learn about Richard's alleged crimes. During our marriage, I had no knowledge of any illegal activities. I'm cooperating fully with authorities." Her performance was perfect, the innocent spouse shocked and betrayed, eager to help bring a criminal to justice. Richard wanted to scream. Every word was a calculated lie. She knew everything because she'd orchestrated it all. But without proof, without access to his records, without his legal team, he was helpless. Sir, we're low on gas, Marcus said quietly, and I hate to mention it, but I haven't been paid in 3 days. The company accounts are frozen. Richard's wallet was empty except for $63 in cash, all that remained of his vast fortune in practical terms. He handed Marcus $40. Fill up the tank. Keep the rest for yourself. I'm sorry I can't offer more right now. Sir, where are we going? That was the question, wasn't it? Richard stared out at the city lights. He needed to think, to plan, to find some angle Victoria hadn't anticipated, but his mind was a fog of panic and exhaustion. Pull over at the next coffee shop, he said finally. Maybe caffeine would help him think clearly. Marcus stopped outside a small diner in Chinatown. Richard stepped out into the cold evening air, his expensive suit drawing curious glances from the working-class neighborhood. He pushed through the diner's door and immediately felt out of place among the tired workers grabbing late dinners. He ordered black coffee and found a corner booth, spreading out the few papers he'd managed to grab from his office. Transaction records from the morning, bank statements showing the moment his billions evaporated. He studied the timestamps, the routing numbers, searching for any clue about how Victoria had pulled this off. The coffee shop's television was tuned to a financial news channel. Richard watched his own face flash across the screen, his official corporate portrait replaced by an unflattering courtroom sketch labeled "Alleged Fraudster." An expert was explaining how his collapse would send shockwaves through the entire tech investment sector. Rough day. Richard looked up to find an elderly man, maybe 70, standing beside his booth. The man's clothes were worn but clean, his eyes kind but knowing. "You could say that," Richard muttered, turning back to his papers. "I've been watching the news. That's you, isn't it? The billionaire." Richard's jaw tightened. "Former billionaire. And I didn't do what they're saying. I was set up." The old man slid into the opposite side of the booth, uninvited. "Name's George. Been living in this neighborhood 40 years. Seen a lot of people at their lowest points. You got that look, the one that says you're trying to figure out if it's even worth fighting anymore. I appreciate the concern, but you think you're alone in this, that nobody could possibly understand what you're going through," George interrupted gently. "Here's what I know about rock bottom, son. It's not actually the end. It's just where you finally stop lying to yourself and start seeing things clearly." Richard wanted to argue, to explain that this man couldn't possibly comprehend the complexity of his situation. But something in George's weathered face stopped him. This was someone who'd survived his own catastrophes and come out the other side. "What did you lose?" Richard asked quietly. "Everything. Wife, daughter, my business, my house. 23 years ago. Spent 5 years homeless, actually. Thought about ending it more times than I can count." George paused, sipping his own coffee. "But I learned something important. When you got nothing left to lose, you finally get to see who you really are. And sometimes help comes from the places you least expect." "I don't have time for philosophy," Richard said, his voice strained. "I have until midnight to find a way out of this nightmare, or I lose everything permanently. My ex-wife has somehow frozen $6.8 billion and framed me for crimes I didn't commit. She's got evidence planted everywhere, witnesses probably paid off, and I can't even access my own records to defend myself." George studied him thoughtfully. $6.8 billion. That's a lot of money to move without leaving traces. Even the best criminals make mistakes. Not Victoria. She's been planning this for years, probably since the day we got married. She's an attorney. She knows every loophole, every vulnerability in the system. Then you need to think like someone she'd never expect. Someone who sees the world completely differently than both of you do. George stood up, leaving a few dollars on the table. "Good luck, son. I hope you find your way through this." As the old man left, Richard stared at his papers again, George's words echoing in his mind. Think like someone Victoria would never expect. But who? All of his usual advantages, Money, connections, legal expertise were useless now. His phone buzzed. Another message from Victoria. 8 hours left. Hope you're enjoying your last taste of freedom. Richard's hands shook with rage and helplessness. Somewhere out there was the key to unraveling her scheme. He just had to find it. Emma found her father at 3 a.m, passed out in an alley behind a liquor store in the Lower East Side. The bottle beside him was empty, and his face was bruised. Fresh injuries from another fight, probably with other homeless men over territory or perceived insults. She'd seen this scene too many times. "Dad," she whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. "Dad, wake up." Tom Miller's eyes opened slowly, unfocused and bloodshot. When he finally recognized his daughter, shame washed over his features. "Emma, baby, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I got the job. I really did. But then they wanted references and a permanent address, and I couldn't." "It's okay, Dad." But it wasn't okay, and they both knew it. Emma helped him sit up, noticing how much thinner he'd become. Her father had once been strong, proud, a construction worker who provided for his family. Now he was a shell, broken by grief and circumstances he couldn't control. "You need to eat something," she said, pulling out a slightly squashed sandwich she'd found outside a deli earlier. It was meant for her breakfast, but her father needed it more. Tom took the sandwich with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. "You shouldn't have to take care of me. I'm supposed to take care of you. What kind of father have I become?" Emma didn't have an answer. She just held her teddy bear tighter and leaned against her father's shoulder, trying to share what little warmth they had between them. The night was cold, and she could feel her chest getting tighter. The asthma that had plagued her since childhood was acting up again. She needed her inhaler, but it had run out weeks ago, and inhalers cost money they didn't have. "Tomorrow will be better," Tom promised, the same empty promise he'd been making for months. "I'll get us out of this, sweetheart. I'll fix everything." But Emma had stopped believing in tomorrow. She'd learned to live in the moment, to find small victories wherever she could. A dry place to sleep, a meal, a few hours without being cold. Hoping for more than that only led to disappointment. As her father drifted back into troubled sleep, Emma's mind wandered to the man she'd seen earlier, the one in the expensive suit who'd looked just as lost and desperate as she felt. She wondered what had happened to him, what kind of problems someone with that much obvious wealth could possibly have. In her 7 years of life, Emma had developed an unexpected skill: observation. When you lived on the streets, survival meant paying attention to everything: which people were dangerous, which store owners might show kindness, which routes were safest at different times of day, which patterns in the chaos of the city might offer opportunity. She'd also learned to read people. Her mother, before the cancer took her mind along with her body, had been a bookkeeper. She'd taught Emma numbers and patterns, how to spot when things didn't add up. "You have a gift, baby," her mother had said during one of her last lucid moments. "You see connections other people miss. Don't ever lose that, no matter what happens." Emma hadn't understood then, but now, living on the streets, she'd come to realize what her mother meant. She could look at a situation and instinctively understand the moving parts, see solutions that seemed obvious to her but invisible to everyone else. Like the grocery store on 3rd Avenue that threw out perfectly good food every Tuesday at exactly 6 p.m. because of corporate policy, but the manager always accidentally left the dumpster unlocked for an hour. Or the pattern of police patrols that created a 15-minute window when she and her father could safely sleep in the subway station at 23rd Street. She saw the world as a puzzle, and she'd become very good at finding the pieces that fit. As dawn began to break over the city, Emma gently freed herself from her father's arm and stood up. She needed to find food for the day, and the early morning was often the best time, when bakeries threw out yesterday's bread and when kind people heading to work might spare some change. She walked through the awakening streets, her teddy bear tucked under her arm, her sharp eyes taking in everything. Vendors setting up their carts. Business people hurrying to catch trains. The rhythm and flow of the city preparing for another day. And somewhere in this vast metropolis, a desperate billionaire was running out of time, unaware that the solution to his impossible problem was being carried by a hungry 7-year-old girl with a torn teddy bear and a mind that saw patterns everywhere. Richard hadn't slept. He'd spent the entire night in his car, parked in an industrial area of Brooklyn, poring over every document he had, making notes, trying to trace Victoria's scheme. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, he was no closer to a solution. Marcus had stayed with him through the night, loyal, despite having every reason to abandon a boss who couldn't pay him. Now, in the early morning light, the driver cleared his throat. "Sir, I'm sorry, but I need to get home to my family. My wife. She's worried, and with everything going on, I can't afford to lose my other job." Marcus worked 2 jobs to support his family. Driving had been his side income. "I understand," Richard said, shaking Marcus's hand. "Thank you for staying this long. You didn't have to. Good luck, Mr. Foster. I hope you prove them all wrong." As Marcus drove away, Richard stood alone on the empty street, his expensive suit now wrinkled and stained, his face unshaven, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. He checked his watch, 7:30 a.m. Less than 5 hours until Victoria's midnight deadline, though he still didn't fully understand what would happen then. What else could she possibly take that she hadn't already stolen? His prepaid phone, purchased with his last $20 at a convenience store, buzzed with a news alert. His company's board had held an emergency meeting overnight and voted unanimously to remove him as CEO. Foster Industries was being renamed. His life's work was being erased, as if he'd never existed. Richard started walking, no destination in mind, just moving because standing still felt like giving up. He found himself in Chinatown, the streets already bustling with activity. The smell of fresh dumplings and noodles made his stomach growl. He hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. He ducked into a small restaurant and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, using coins he'd scrounged from the car. As he waited for his food, he overheard a conversation at the next table. 2 men speaking in rapid Mandarin. Richard had learned the language during his years building business relationships in Asia, though he rarely advertised this skill. What he heard made his blood run cold. "The Foster takedown is complete," one man said. "Victoria Chen delivered as promised. The old network is very pleased." "And Foster himself?" the other asked. "By tonight, he'll be arrested on additional charges. We've planted evidence in his Connecticut estate. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Victoria gets her payment, and we get control of Foster Industries' Asian contracts." Richard's mind reeled. Victoria Chen. She'd changed her last name after the divorce, reclaiming her Chinese heritage. But this conversation suggested something far bigger than a vindictive ex-wife. This was organized crime, a sophisticated operation that had used his marriage and divorce as a cover for corporate espionage and takeover. The men stood to leave, and Richard instinctively ducked his head, not wanting to be recognized. After they left, he sat in stunned silence, his untouched noodles growing cold. This wasn't just about recovering his money anymore. Victoria was working with dangerous people, and if he didn't find proof of the conspiracy, he'd be silenced permanently. But how could he possibly fight a criminal network with resources and connections he couldn't even fathom? He had no money, no allies, no access to the evidence he needed. The federal agents investigating him were probably either fooled by Victoria's planted evidence or possibly even corrupted by her partners. Richard paid for his meal and stepped back into the morning chaos of Chinatown. He walked aimlessly, his mind trying to process this new information and find some angle, some possibility he hadn't considered. That's when he saw her again. The little girl from yesterday, the one with the teddy bear. She was standing outside a bank, watching something intently. Her clothes were even more ragged in the daylight, her face thin and pale, but her eyes were sharp and focused. She was staring at the bank's electronic billboard, which displayed stock prices and financial news. Specifically, she was watching the coverage of Foster Industries' collapse, her small face scrunched in concentration, as if she were solving a complex puzzle in her mind. Richard almost kept walking. What could a homeless child possibly have to do with his catastrophe? But something about her intense focus stopped him. He followed her gaze to the billboard, trying to see what she was seeing. The news ticker scrolled past. Foster Industries stock drops 78% following CEO fraud allegations. Federal investigation uncovers Swiss bank accounts. Former wife cooperating with authorities. The girl suddenly spoke, her voice soft but clear. The numbers don't match. Richard blinked. Excuse me? She looked up at him, and recognition flickered in her eyes. She remembered him from yesterday. The numbers on the news. They don't match the patterns. Someone's lying. Richard stared at the small girl, his exhaustion making him wonder if he was hallucinating. What do you mean the numbers don't match? Emma pointed at the billboard with her teddy bear's paw. They said you moved $6.8 billion to Swiss accounts. But Swiss accounts need 3-day verification for transactions over $1 billion. That's the rule. It's only been 1 day since your accounts were frozen. So either the money's not really in Switzerland, or the whole timeline is wrong. Richard's mind struggled to process what he was hearing. How did a 7-year-old homeless girl know about Swiss banking regulations? More importantly, why hadn't he noticed this discrepancy himself? How do you know that? He asked, crouching down to her level. My mom taught me about numbers before she died. She was a bookkeeper. She used to let me help her with client accounts, said I had a gift for seeing patterns. Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, not boastful. I've been watching the news about you all morning. The story doesn't make sense. Too many things happen too fast. Like someone wrote a script but didn't check if it was possible. Richard felt something shift in his chest, the first spark of hope since this nightmare began. What else doesn't make sense? Emma considered this, her young face serious. They say you did insider trading with a company called Stellar Tech, using information from merger discussions. But Stellar Tech announced their quarterly earnings 2 days before your meeting date. That's public information. You wouldn't need inside knowledge. Anyone could have made those trades. Richard pulled out his phone and quickly verified her observation. She was absolutely right. The timeline of his alleged insider trading didn't work. The information he supposedly used illegally had already been public when he made the trades. It was a detail his lawyer should have caught immediately, but in the chaos, and with all of them abandoning him, no one had noticed. You're right, he breathed. You're completely right. This could prove the charges are fabricated. Maybe, Emma said cautiously, but you need to find who changed the dates in your records. Someone had to make the fake evidence look real. Richard studied this remarkable child. Her clothes were dirty, she was clearly malnourished, and she clutched that ragged teddy bear like a lifeline. But her mind was sharp, analytical, seeing connections he'd missed in his panic. What's your name? He asked gently. Emma Miller. I'm 7. I live with my dad, but he's not doing so well right now. I'm Richard Foster. I know. You're the billionaire everyone's talking about. She paused. My dad says you're probably a bad man who stole money from regular people. The words stung, but Richard couldn't blame her father for believing the news. I didn't steal anything, Emma. Someone very clever made it look like I did. Someone who knows how to manipulate financial systems and plant false evidence. Your ex-wife? Yes. Her name is Victoria. We were married for 12 years. I thought I knew her, but... Richard's voice trailed off. How did you explain betrayal of that magnitude to a child? She's working with other bad people, Emma said, and it wasn't a question. That's why she's so good at this. She has help. I think you're right. I overheard something this morning that suggested she's involved with organized crime, but I have no proof, no way to access my own records to show the discrepancies you've noticed. Emma was quiet for a moment, chewing her lip thoughtfully. Then she said something that changed everything. I might know a way to help you, but I need you to help my dad first. Richard's heart sank. Of course. Nothing was free, not even from a desperate child. Emma, I don't have any money. Everything I had is gone. I don't want money, she said quickly. I want you to fix Mr. Bear. She held up her teddy bear, showing the torn seam and missing stuffing. My mom gave him to me before she died. He's all I have left of her. Dad can't fix him because his hands shake too much now. If you fix Mr. Bear, I'll help you get your money back. Richard looked at the shabby teddy bear, then at the small girl who was offering to help a stranger solve a multi-billion-dollar conspiracy in exchange for a simple act of kindness. The absurdity of the situation almost made him laugh. He was being offered salvation by a 7-year-old in exchange for a sewing job. But something in Emma's eyes told him this was the most important transaction of his life. Deal, he said, holding out his hand. Emma shook it solemnly, her small hand disappearing in his. But I need to ask, how exactly do you plan to help me recover $6.8 billion? Emma's eyes went back to the billboard, scanning the scrolling numbers and news updates. The money didn't disappear. Money that big can't just vanish. It has to go somewhere, and wherever it went, it left tracks. We just need to follow the pattern. But first, we need to get to a computer with access to banking networks. That's impossible. I'm being investigated by federal agents. I can't walk into a bank or... Not a bank, Emma interrupted. A library. They have computers with internet access, and I know a librarian who's nice and won't ask questions. She looked at him seriously. Do you really want your money back, or are you going to keep making excuses about why everything's impossible? Richard found himself speechless. Here was a homeless 7-year-old lecturing him about determination and problem-solving, and she was absolutely right. He'd spent the last 24 hours paralyzed by the impossibility of his situation, letting his panic and exhaustion cloud his thinking. You're right. I'm sorry. Let's go to this library. He stood up, his body aching from a sleepless night. But Emma, I need you to understand something. The people behind this are dangerous. If they find out you're helping me, they might hurt you. Emma looked up at him with eyes far older than her years. I'm already hurting. I'm cold and hungry, and my dad is sick, and we don't have anywhere to live. Sometimes not doing anything is more dangerous than doing something. That's what my mom used to say. Yes, As they started walking toward the library, Richard felt the strangest sensation. For the first time since his world collapsed, he didn't feel completely alone. This small, brilliant girl had given him something no amount of money could buy: hope, and a genuine ally who had nothing to gain except a repaired teddy bear. What Richard didn't know was that Emma had already noticed something crucial in the banking transactions shown on the billboard, a routing number pattern that appeared 3 times in different contexts, suggesting a hidden connection between supposedly separate accounts. She hadn't mentioned it yet because she wanted to verify her theory first. And what Emma didn't know was that Victoria's partners were already aware that Richard had escaped the federal raid, and they were systematically checking every location he might go, every person he might contact. The clock was ticking faster than either of them realized. The New York Public Library on East Broadway was nearly empty when Emma led Richard inside at 9 a.m. Mrs. Chen, the librarian, looked up from her desk, and her eyes widened in recognition. Richard Foster's face had been plastered across every news channel for the past 24 hours. But before she could react, Emma rushed forward with a warm smile. Good morning, Mrs. Chen. We just need to use the computers for a little while. Is that okay? The librarian's expression softened as she looked at the small girl she'd known for months. Of course, sweetheart, you know where they are. They settled at a terminal in the back corner. Emma's fingers flew across the keyboard with surprising confidence, navigating through financial databases and banking portals that Richard didn't even know were accessible to the public. "Show me what you remember about the account numbers," Emma said, her voice focused and mature beyond her 7 years. Richard recited the routing codes and account information he'd memorized during years of managing his fortune. Emma typed rapidly, pulling up transaction records and cross-referencing them against multiple databases. "Here," she said after several minutes of concentrated work, "look at this. Your money was transferred to something called Meridian Strategic Holdings. It's registered in Luxembourg. But watch this." She pulled up another screen. "The routing number is almost identical to your company's employee pension fund. See? Only these 2 digits are different." Richard leaned closer to the screen, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. She was absolutely right. The similarity couldn't be coincidental. Someone was trying to make it look like I was stealing from my own employees' retirement savings. Exactly, but they made a mistake. Emma's fingers danced across the keyboard again. "Real pension fund transfers require approval signatures from at least 3 board members. Your transaction only has 1 digital signature. That means it's fake." Richard felt the first genuine spark of hope since this nightmare began. This brilliant child had found a critical flaw in Victoria's scheme in less than 10 minutes. His expensive lawyers hadn't noticed it. The federal investigators hadn't caught it. But Emma, with her mother's training and her natural gift for seeing patterns, had spotted it immediately. Before Richard could respond, Emma's entire body went rigid. Her hand gripped his arm tightly. "Those men," she whispered, her voice suddenly small and frightened. "The ones in the dark suits by the entrance. They work for Mr. Zhang." Richard glanced toward the library entrance and saw 2 men in expensive suits scanning the room. Their movements were predatory, purposeful. One of them pulled out a phone and showed something to Mrs. Chen, probably Richard's photograph. "We need to leave right now," Emma said urgently, already closing the browser windows and standing up. "There's a back exit through the staff area. Follow me and don't look back." They moved quickly, but not so fast as to draw attention. Emma navigated through the library stacks with practiced ease, leading Richard through a door marked "Staff Only" and down a narrow hallway. Behind them, Richard heard raised voices, Mrs. Chen arguing with the men, buying them precious seconds. They emerged into an alley behind the library. Rain was starting to fall, cold and steady. Emma immediately turned left and began walking quickly through a maze of back streets and side alleys. Richard struggled to keep up, his expensive shoes slipping on the wet pavement. After several blocks of twisting through the urban labyrinth, Emma pulled him into an abandoned loading dock. They pressed against the wall, catching their breath while rain poured down outside their shelter. "How did they find us so fast?" Richard gasped, his heart pounding. "Your phone, probably. Or facial recognition on street cameras. Maybe both." Emma studied him with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. "And you need different clothes. You look like a rich person trying to pretend they're poor. It makes you stand out." Richard glanced down at his $1,000 suit, now rumpled and stained but still obviously expensive. She was right. Even in his disheveled state, he looked completely out of place in these neighborhoods. "I don't have money for new clothes," he admitted, the words strange and bitter in his mouth. A week ago, he could have bought an entire clothing store without thinking twice. Emma chewed her lip thoughtfully for a moment, then made a decision. "Come with me. But you have to trust me and not ask too many questions, okay?" Richard nodded. At this point, trusting a 7-year-old homeless girl was the most rational thing he'd done in days. She'd already proven herself more competent and reliable than anyone else in his life. They left the loading dock, and Emma led him deeper into the poorest neighborhoods of Lower Manhattan. The buildings here were decrepit, graffitied, barely standing, but Emma moved through these streets with complete confidence, greeting occasional residents with small waves that were sometimes returned. After 20 minutes of walking, Emma stopped in front of a building that looked abandoned. But when they entered, Richard could hear sounds of life: children crying, people arguing, cooking smells mixed with dampness and decay. This was where invisible people lived, the ones who'd fallen through every crack in the system. Emma climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and stopped at apartment 3C. She knocked in a specific pattern: 2 quick taps, 1 slow, 2 more quick. After a moment, the door opened a crack, revealing a teenage boy with intelligent eyes and a defensive posture. "Emma!" The boy's expression shifted from cautious to concerned. "What are you doing here? It's not safe right now." Zhang's people are everywhere looking for..." He stopped mid-sentence as he noticed Richard standing behind her. His eyes widened with recognition. "Are you completely insane? That's Richard Foster. Do you have any idea how much trouble you're bringing to this building?" Emma ushered past the boy into the apartment. "David, please just listen for 1 minute. He's innocent. I've seen the financial records myself. The evidence against him is fake. Someone very sophisticated is framing him, and those same people are connected to Mr. Zhang." David stared at her, then at Richard, then back at Emma. "You're serious? You actually believe this guy is innocent?" "I don't believe it, I know it. I've seen the patterns in the data." Emma's voice was firm. "The transaction timelines don't match Swiss banking regulations. The routing numbers are almost identical to legitimate company accounts, but with 2 digits changed. The digital signatures are forgeries. This is a professional setup, David." The teenager studied Richard with new interest, then made a decision. "Get inside, quickly. If Zhang's people are actively searching, we don't have much time." The apartment was small and cramped, but Richard immediately noticed the sophisticated computer equipment everywhere: jury-rigged systems built from salvaged parts, multiple monitors, cables running across the floor. This was a hacker's den. "David's a genius with computers," Emma explained. "He had a full scholarship to MIT, but when his parents died 2 years ago, he ended up on the streets. Now he does freelance work." "I hack for money," David interrupted bluntly. "Let's not sugarcoat it. I break into systems for paying clients. It's not legal and I'm not proud of it, but it keeps me alive and independent." He turned to Richard. "So tell me everything, and I mean everything. If I'm going to risk federal prison helping you, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with." Richard quickly explained the situation. Victoria's betrayal, the $6.8 billion that vanished overnight, the federal investigation, the treason charges that had just been announced, and the sophisticated conspiracy that seemed designed not just to steal his money, but to destroy him completely. David listened intently while his fingers flew across one of his keyboards, pulling up news articles, financial reports, and government databases. "Victoria Chen," he muttered. "Yeah, I've heard that name in certain circles. She's been making quiet moves in the tech sector for years. Smart, ruthless, and extremely well connected." He pulled up several screens of code and data. "Give me a minute, I want to check something." For several tense minutes, the only sounds were keyboard clicks and the distant sounds of the building around them. Then David whistled low. Emma was right. Someone used advanced malware to infiltrate Foster Industries' servers about 3 months ago. The attack signature is incredibly sophisticated, probably state-sponsored level. Richard felt ice in his veins. What does that mean? It means we're not dealing with just corporate espionage or a vindictive ex-wife. This has the fingerprints of a professional intelligence operation. David turned his monitor so Richard could see complex code displays. The malware was designed to sit dormant in your systems, collecting information, mapping your security protocols, and waiting for the right moment to activate. When it did activate, it moved your money and planted false evidence simultaneously. This isn't amateur hour, Mr. Foster. Emma spoke up from her position by the window where she'd been keeping watch. Can you access the login logs from Richard's banking accounts? If Victoria was the one who moved the money, there should be records of when and how she accessed his accounts. Maybe, David said slowly. But it would take time, specialized access, and if I get caught attempting this, I'm looking at serious federal prison time. He looked directly at Richard. So here's my question. What's in it for me? Why should I risk everything to help a billionaire who probably wouldn't have noticed someone like me existed a week ago? The question was fair and brutally honest. Richard met the teenager's eyes. You're absolutely right. A week ago, I wouldn't have noticed you. I was too busy building my empire, too focused on profit margins and market share to see the brilliant minds being wasted because of poverty and circumstances. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I can't undo that blindness, but I can promise you this. If you help me recover what was stolen, I will use every resource I get back to make sure you get that MIT scholarship again. Full tuition, living expenses, everything you need. And I'll fund a program to help other kids like you and Emma who've fallen through the cracks. No, words are cheap, Mr. Foster. Then how about this? Whether I recover my money or not, if we survive this situation, I will work for the rest of my life to make good on that promise. Emma trusted me enough to ask for my help fixing her teddy bear in exchange for saving my entire fortune. The least I can do is match her level of commitment. David studied Richard's face for a long moment, evaluating his sincerity. Finally, he nodded slowly. Okay, but understand this. If you betray that promise, I'll make sure every hacker collective, every tech publication, and every social media platform knows exactly what kind of person you really are. Your reputation will never recover. Fair enough, Richard agreed. David turned back to his computers. This is going to take several hours of work, and it's not without significant risk. Emma, you need to keep watch at the window. Mr. Foster, you're going to tell me everything you know about Foster Industries' security architecture, your banking protocols, and any technical details that might help me access these logs without triggering alarms. As Richard began explaining technical specifications and security measures, Emma suddenly tensed at the window. David, she said urgently but quietly, we have company. Black SUV just parked across the street. 2 men getting out, and they're looking at this building. David's fingers never stopped typing. How much time do we have? Maybe 5 minutes before they start searching apartments on this floor. I need at least 10 minutes to bypass the security systems and start the download. Richard stood up immediately. Then Emma and I will lead them away from here. We'll buy you the time you need. Richard and Emma slipped out of David's apartment through a back window that led to a rusted fire escape. The metal was slick with rain and creaked ominously under Richard's weight. Emma moved ahead with practiced ease, clearly having used this route many times before. Richard followed carefully, his expensive leather shoes offering almost no traction on the wet metal. They climbed upward rather than down, Emma explaining in whispers that Zhang's men would expect them to run for street level. Instead, they reached the roof and then jumped across a 3-foot gap to the adjacent building. Richard's heart hammered in his chest as he made the leap, landing hard and nearly losing his balance. Emma caught his arm, steadying him with surprising strength. They crossed 3 more rooftops this way, Emma guiding them along a path she clearly knew well. Behind them, Richard could hear shouting from David's building. The men had discovered they were gone. Finally, Emma led him to a different fire escape that descended into an alley several blocks from where they'd started. At street level, Richard was gasping for air, his body pushed far beyond the limits of his executive lifestyle. Emma, despite being malnourished and fighting chronic asthma, seemed less winded. Survival had made her stronger than any 7-year-old should need to be. "You need different clothes right now," Emma said, eyeing his ruined suit with critical assessment. "Wait here. I'll be right back." Before Richard could protest, she darted into a small second-hand clothing store, barely more than someone's apartment converted into a business. She emerged 5 minutes later, carrying worn jeans, a plain grey hoodie, and a baseball cap. "How did you pay for these?" Richard asked, knowing she had no money. Emma held up her teddy bear, and Richard's heart sank. The bear looked even more worn than before. She'd given it up. "I told the lady my dad needed clothes and offered Mr. Bear as payment. She didn't want to take him at first, but I insisted. She said I could come back tomorrow with $10 and get him back." Richard felt something break inside his chest. Emma had sacrificed the one possession that truly mattered to her, her last physical connection to her dead mother, to help him hide from his enemies. The level of trust and sacrifice from this child shamed him more than any of his business failures ever could. "Emma, I can't let you. Just put on the clothes," she interrupted firmly, her voice brooking no argument despite her small size. "We don't have time to argue. Every second we stand here talking, those men get closer to finding us." Richard changed quickly in the alley, ditching his expensive suit in a dumpster. The transformation was remarkable. In the worn jeans, faded hoodie, and pulled-low baseball cap, he looked like any other struggling New Yorker, anonymous in the city's vast crowd of the forgotten and overlooked. Emma nodded her approval. "Much better. Now you don't stand out." They caught a subway, using Emma's knowledge of which turnstiles were broken and could be slipped through without payment. Richard felt like a criminal, but Emma simply shrugged. "When you don't have money, you learn different rules for moving through the city. Nobody's going to help you follow the official rules when those rules assume you have resources you don't have." The subway car was packed with morning commuters heading to work. Richard kept his head down, acutely aware that his face had been all over the news. But surrounded by people absorbed in their phones and their own problems, he seemed invisible. The anonymity was both terrifying and liberating. Emma sat beside him, her legs swinging without touching the floor. Her hands were empty without Mr. Bear. And Richard noticed her eyes were rimmed with red, though she hadn't shed a single tear where he could see. "I'll get your bear back," Richard promised quietly, leaning close so only she could hear over the train's noise. "I swear to you, Emma. And I'll fix him properly just like we agreed." "I know you will," Emma said softly. But her voice carried a note of sadness that made her sound much older than 7. For all her brilliance and surprising maturity, she was still just a child who'd given up her most precious possession to help a stranger. The train lurched into motion, carrying them toward Grand Central Station, where they'd arranged to meet David. Richard's prepaid phone felt like a tracking device in his pocket. He'd been foolish to keep it this long, letting emotion override logic. As soon as they reached the terminal, he'd destroy it completely. "Why are you really helping me?" Richard asked suddenly. "The actual reason. It can't just be about getting your teddy bear fixed." "You could have asked anyone for that. Why risk so much for someone you don't know?" Emma was quiet for a long time, watching the tunnel lights flash past the windows. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible over the ambient noise. "My dad used to be strong and happy. He protected me and Mom, provided for us, made us feel safe. Then Mom got cancer, and everything fell apart. The medical bills, the loan sharks, the desperation. I watched him break into smaller and smaller pieces, and I couldn't do anything to stop it or help him." She looked up at Richard with those eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. "You're broken too, but in a different way. And unlike with my dad, I actually can help fix what's wrong with you. Maybe if I can figure out how to save you, I'll learn how to save him." The logic was heartbreaking. A child believing that solving a stranger's crisis might give her the blueprint to rescue her own father from his spiral into depression and addiction. But Richard understood it completely. Sometimes you practice saving someone else because saving the person you actually loved felt impossible, overwhelming, too painful to approach directly. Grand Central Terminal's main concourse was as magnificent as Richard remembered. Soaring ceilings, painted with constellations, golden afternoon light streaming through tall windows, thousands of people flowing through the space like blood through arteries. They found a spot near the famous information booth and waited for David. The teenager arrived at exactly 11:52 a.m., slightly out of breath and sporting fresh bruises on his face. He was limping and carrying a laptop bag. Emma rushed to him immediately. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "Zhang's guys caught up with me as I was leaving the building. Had to fight my way out. Took some hits, but I got away." David winced as he sat down on a nearby bench. "But the important thing is, I got the data, all of it. And Emma, what I found is going to blow your mind." They moved to the Whispering Gallery Emma had mentioned, an architectural quirk near the Oyster Bar where sound waves travelled along the curved tile ceiling. Two people standing in opposite corners could whisper and hear each other clearly, while those standing nearby heard nothing. It was perfect for a secret conversation in a public place. David positioned himself in one corner, while Richard stood in the opposite corner. Emma kept watch from a central position. David began speaking in a low voice that somehow carried perfectly to Richard's ear, across the distance. "Victoria didn't just steal your money, Mr. Foster. She orchestrated an entire espionage operation with your company as the target. I found evidence that she's been working with Chinese intelligence services for at least 5 years. Probably since before she even married you." Richard felt the ground shift beneath him. "That's impossible. We met at a charity function. It was completely random." "Nothing was random," David interrupted. "I found emails and planning documents going back 6 years, showing how they researched you, analyzed your patterns and preferences, identified your vulnerabilities. They literally engineered your first meeting with Victoria. She was an intelligence asset, and you were the target they assigned her to compromise." The words hit Richard like physical blows. His entire marriage, 12 years of his life, had been a lie from the very beginning. Every intimate moment, every shared secret, every time he trusted Victoria with sensitive business information, it had all been part of her mission. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that Richard felt physically ill. "The evidence I downloaded proves everything," David continued. "The forged transactions, the planted evidence, the coordination with Zhang's criminal organization to provide enforcement and intimidation. But here's the critical thing. Victoria made a mistake, a big one." "What mistake?" Richard managed to ask, his voice hollow. "She kept detailed records of every step of the operation, probably as insurance against her handlers betraying her or cutting her loose. She documented every crime, every person involved, every dollar transferred, every piece of leverage she used. And I know exactly where those files are stored." Richard's mind struggled to process this new information. Where? "In a secure server system maintained by a law firm in Midtown Manhattan, Grayson and Associates. They specialize in providing ultra-secure document storage for high-net-worth individuals involved in legally complicated situations. Victoria has a personal vault there under a shell company name. If we can access that vault, we'll have everything we need to prove your innocence and expose the entire espionage network." "How do we access it?" "We can't do it remotely. The security is too sophisticated, and any hacking attempt would be detected instantly, triggering automatic data destruction protocols. But there's a physical option." David paused. "You used to work in that building, didn't you? 20 years ago, before Foster Industries moved to its current headquarters." Richard's memory struggled through the fog of exhaustion and shock. "Yes, I had an office there for about 3 years early in my career. But that was 2 decades ago. Everything will have changed. Actually, not as much as you'd think. I pulled the building records and security system specifications. The floor plan is identical, and they're still using the same biometric security system, just with updated firmware. And here's the beautiful part. They never purged old employee data from the biometric database. Your fingerprints and retinal scan are still in their system as authorized access credentials for the executive floors. Richard's analytical mind began working through the implications despite his emotional turmoil. You're suggesting we break into a law firm to steal evidence. I'm suggesting you use your still valid biometric credentials to enter a building where you're technically still in the security database as an authorized person. It's not exactly breaking in if the security system recognizes you as legitimate. That's splitting hairs, and you know it. If we get caught, this destroys any remaining credibility I have with law enforcement. I'll go to prison for certain, regardless of what the evidence proves. And if we don't get those files, David countered, Victoria's conspiracy succeeds completely. You go to prison anyway, probably for the rest of your life, while she walks free and continues compromising American technology companies for foreign intelligence services. Emma's voice cut through their whispered debate. Richard, you need to see this, now. She was pointing at one of the terminal's large television screens mounted near the departures board. A breaking news banner scrolled across the bottom. Breaking. Richard Foster. Named in federal indictment, 40 counts including treason and espionage. Richard's photograph filled the screen, his official corporate portrait, which now seemed like an image from another lifetime. A news anchor was explaining in grave tones about the sealed indictment that had just been announced, charging Richard with selling classified defense technology to foreign adversaries and compromising national security. The news coverage continued with footage of Victoria standing at a podium, surrounded by federal agents and prosecutors. She looked appropriately grave and professional, perfectly cast in the role of the patriotic ex-wife who'd helped expose her husband's alleged treason. I never suspected the extent of Richard's betrayal of our country, Victoria said to the assembled cameras, her voice trembling just enough to seem genuinely emotional. When federal investigators approached me with evidence of his espionage activities, I was devastated. My entire marriage had been built on lies. But I knew my duty to America had to come first, even if it meant exposing my former husband's crimes. Richard watched his world collapse in real time on a public television screen. This was Victoria's masterstroke. By accusing him of the exact crimes she'd committed, she'd created the perfect cover story. Any investigation into espionage would find the digital trail she'd created, but everyone would believe Richard was the traitor, not her. She's a genius, David whispered grimly. An evil genius, but brilliant nonetheless. By framing you for her own crimes, she's inoculated herself against investigation. Anyone looking into Chinese espionage at Foster Industries will find evidence pointing directly at you. Emma's small hand slipped into Richard's. Her touch was warm and solid, anchoring him to reality when everything else felt like it was spiraling into nightmare. We have to get those files tonight, she said firmly. It's the only way. Richard looked down at this remarkable 7-year-old who'd already risked so much to help him. Then he looked at David, the brilliant teenager who'd joined their impossible cause, despite having every reason to stay far away from a wanted fugitive. These two kids from the streets, forgotten and overlooked by society, were his only allies against a vast conspiracy backed by foreign intelligence services. The odds were astronomical, the risks were catastrophic, and they had less than 14 hours to pull off a heist that could just as easily end with all of them in prison or dead. But what choice did he have? Roll over and accept defeat, spend the rest of his life in prison for crimes he didn't commit, while Victoria's espionage network continued operating. Let Emma's faith in him be proven wrong. "Okay," Richard said quietly but firmly. "We do this tonight. David, what's the plan?" The law firm's security is sophisticated but predictable. 2 guards at the main entrance, 1 roving guard per floor, and a comprehensive camera system. But the cameras have blind spots, and the guards follow precise routines. There's a 23-minute window every night at 1 a.m. when the guard rotation creates an opportunity. We go in through the loading dock, use your biometrics to access the service elevator, ride to the 18th floor where the document vault is located, plug my USB drive into their system to download Victoria's files, and get out before the next guard rotation brings someone to that floor. How long will the download take? 8 minutes for the extraction program to copy everything. That gives us 12 minutes total from entry to exit. It's tight, but doable if everything goes according to plan. And if something goes wrong? David's expression was grim. If something goes wrong, you run. Don't try to fight, don't stop to explain. Just run as fast as you can and get as far away as possible. Emma spoke up. "I'm going with you." "Absolutely not," Richard said immediately. "This is too dangerous. If you get caught, you'll need someone who can think fast and see patterns you might miss under stress. That's me." Emma's voice was calm, but completely unyielding. "You said we're a team. Teams don't abandon each other when things get hard or dangerous." David nodded slowly. "She's right, Richard. And honestly, having a kid with you actually helps the cover. A man sneaking around alone looks like a criminal. A man with his daughter looks like a confused parent who got lost in the building. It's better camouflage." Richard wanted to argue, to protect Emma from further risk, but he also recognized they were right. Emma's brilliant mind had already saved him multiple times, and the disguise angle was solid tactical thinking. "Fine," he agreed reluctantly, "but you stay within arm's reach of me every single second, and if I tell you to run, you run immediately with no arguments. Deal?" "Deal," Emma agreed solemnly. They spent the next several hours preparing. David acquired dark clothing for both Richard and Emma, printed detailed building schematics, cloned a security access badge, and created a minute-by-minute timeline of guard movements based on hacked security footage. At 7 p.m., Emma's father, Tom, appeared at the abandoned warehouse where they'd been planning. He looked terrible, shaking, pale, his eyes wild with fear and barely controlled panic. The moment he saw Emma, he stumbled forward and pulled her into a desperate embrace. "Emma! Baby, thank God you're safe. I've been looking everywhere for you." Tom's voice was ragged. "There are dangerous men all over the neighborhood asking questions about you, offering money for information about where you might be. We need to leave the city immediately. Tonight." "Dad, I can't leave. I'm helping someone with something important." Tom's eyes fell on Richard, and recognition flashed across his face. "You're with him?" "The criminal from the news." His voice rose toward panic. "Emma, what have you gotten yourself into? Do you have any idea how much danger you're in right now?" "He's not a criminal, Dad. He's innocent, and we're going to prove it tonight." "No, absolutely not." Tom grabbed Emma's arm, trying to pull her toward the exit. "I've already lost your mother. I will not lose you too. We're leaving right now, and you're never going near this man again." Emma pulled away from her father's grip, her voice breaking with emotion. "Dad, please. For once in 6 months, I need you to be strong. I need you to trust me and believe in me." Tom Miller collapsed to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Your mother would want me to keep you safe. That's all I'm trying to do. Keep you safe." Emma knelt beside her father, holding him as he sobbed. The roles had completely reversed, the child comforting the broken parent. "Mum would want you to do the right thing, even when it's scary, especially when it's scary. She always said that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done, despite being afraid. Richard watched the heartbreaking scene, understanding that Tom Miller wasn't a bad father or a weak man. He was someone who'd been shattered by circumstances beyond his control. The devastating loss of his wife, crushing medical debt, the spiral into addiction and despair. Tom was trying to protect his daughter the only way he still could, by running from danger. After several long minutes, Tom looked up at Richard with red, haunted eyes. "If anything happens to her, anything at all, I'll spend whatever time I have left hunting you down. Do you understand me?" "I understand," Richard replied quietly. "And if anything happens to Emma because of me, I'll deserve whatever you do. But I give you my word, I will protect her with my life." Tom studied Richard's face, searching for sincerity or deception. Finally, he nodded slowly and released Emma's arm. "Be careful, baby girl. Please, be careful." At exactly 12:45 a.m., Richard and Emma approached the law firm building in Midtown Manhattan. The streets were quiet, most businesses closed, only occasional taxis and late-night pedestrians visible. David was positioned a block away with his laptop, ready to loop camera feeds and monitor security systems remotely. Richard's hand trembled slightly as he placed his palm on the loading dock's biometric scanner. For 5 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The scanner's red light blinked, processing data that was 2 decades old. Then it turned green with a soft beep, and the door's lock disengaged with a heavy click. "I cannot believe that actually worked," Richard breathed. "I told you, organizations never purge old data." David's voice crackled through the small wireless earbud Richard wore. "Now move quickly. You've got 12 minutes starting right now." They slipped inside and moved through the dimly lit service corridor. Richard's memories from 20 years ago felt unreliable and dreamlike, but Emma's sharp eyes spotted the service elevator immediately. Another biometric scan, another tense wait, another green light granting access. The elevator ride to the 18th floor felt eternal. Richard watched the floor numbers climb, each one taking them deeper into potential disaster. Emma stood perfectly still beside him, clutching Mr. Bear. She'd retrieved him earlier with $10 David had given her. Her face calm, despite the enormous risk they were taking. The elevator doors opened onto a dark corridor. Richard's retinal scan granted them access through 2 more security doors before they reached the document vault room, a large space filled with server racks, filing systems, and computer terminals. "Northeast corner, Terminal 3, David's voice guided them. "Move fast, but don't run. Running triggers motion sensors." Richard found the correct terminal and inserted David's specially prepared USB drive. The extraction program launched automatically, and a progress bar appeared on the screen. Estimated completion time, 8 minutes, 17 seconds. Now they just had to wait and pray that nothing went wrong. For 3 minutes, the only sounds were the soft hum of servers and Richard's pounding heartbeat. Then Emma's hand suddenly gripped his arm tightly. "Someone's coming," she whispered. "I can hear footsteps in the hallway." David's voice crackled urgently in Richard's ear. "That's impossible. The guard isn't scheduled for another 9 minutes. Something's wrong with the rotation." "I definitely hear footsteps," Emma insisted quietly. "They're getting closer." Richard looked at the download progress, 6 minutes and 30 seconds remaining. They couldn't abort now, not when they were this close. But if they were discovered, everything would be lost. The evidence, their freedom, possibly their lives if Victoria's people got to them before the authorities did. Emma's eyes darted around the room, her brilliant mind processing options faster than Richard could think. "Hide behind that server rack," she whispered urgently. "I'll handle this." "Emma, no!" But she was already moving, positioning herself near the door with Mr. Bear, adopting a confused and frightened expression. Richard had no choice but to hide and trust her quick thinking. The door opened, and a security guard entered, flashlight sweeping the room. He froze when his beam illuminated Emma standing there alone. "What the? How did a kid get in here?" The guard's voice was shocked but not immediately threatening. Emma's lower lip trembled convincingly. "I'm so sorry, mister, I got lost. My daddy works in this building somewhere, and I was trying to find him, but all the hallways looked the same, and I got really confused." She started crying, the performance utterly believable. The guard's expression softened immediately. He crouched down to her level. Hey, it's okay. Don't cry, sweetheart. Let's figure this out together. What's your daddy's name?" I don't remember the company name, but he said he'd be on one of the high floors." Emma's tears were flowing freely now. "Please don't be mad at me. I'm trying really hard to be a big girl and not bother people." The guard pulled out his radio, clearly preparing to call this in to building management. If he did that, they were finished. But Emma was already adapting to the new threat. "Please don't call anyone." Emma sobbed harder. "My daddy told me to stay in the car and wait, but I got scared alone and came looking for him. He's going to be so angry with me. Please, mister, can you just show me back to the lobby? I promise I'll find him there." The guard hesitated, torn between following proper protocol and showing compassion to a frightened child.